Moneyball tactics were absolutely the key to Ole Miss winning the portal.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
The Locked On Ole Miss podcast channel is the most watched Ole Miss podcast, and I am your host, Steven Willis, a 10-year veteran member of the national media with Yahoo Sports and a former Ole Miss staff member. On today's show, we're diving into the Walker Jones interview last night. You can check it out on the YouTube channel, and Ole Miss's strategy in the transfer portal this year. You know, without elite 2024 players like Walter Nolan, Lane Kiffin had to adjust his approach. We always talk about Moneyball on this show, and when Walker Jones said they aim to replace Pooh in the aggregate, my ears perked up. What does that mean for Ole Miss? We'll break it down right after this. Also tonight, Ole Miss baseball hits the road for a midweek matchup in Mobile against South Alabama. It's the first true road test of the season. And meanwhile, Ole Miss basketball faces a strange situation in Nashville where a long tournament run may not be ideal. We'll explain why. We're free and available on all the podcast apps and on YouTube. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every single day. And a special shout out to the insiders and everydayers who keep this show going. And for your second listen, check out Chris Gordy at Locked On SEC and Corey Burton at Locked On Vandy for even more takes on Ole Miss and the SEC. Check it out. Listen, today's episode is brought to you by the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Stay with us for their Armada Team of the Week later on in the episode. So, we were talking with Walker Jones on last night's extra video, and he gave a little update on what's going on with the House settlement, recruiting in the transfer portal, the differences between 2025 and 2024, all of that stuff. I recommend everybody go to the YouTube channel and check that out. It's about 20 minutes. It's good stuff. Walker is always very kind to come on the show and talk about what's going on. He also is talking about things that might be available through the Grove Collective and for the Grove Collective over the next coming weeks and months. So check that out. Walker Jones was talking generally, and he said, money can't hide, those mistakes you make in the recruiting process. And so I think that for a school like us, it's never going to have the biggest checkbooks. We're never going to be the highest bidder or pay the most. We're going to be competitive. And what that means is Ole Miss is going to pay off to a certain amount, but they are not going to overpay. They're not ever going to be Texas. They're not going to be Texas A&M. They're certainly not going to be Texas Tech or Auburn or LSU. Teams that are essentially desperate, overpaying and stuff like that, kind of spending money because they can. Ole Miss does things a little bit differently, and they do it better than everybody else. Ole Miss has a certain Moneyball aspect of their program to where Walker Jones, one of the two interviews back, said that he wants to make $1 spend like $3. And that was really interesting and kind of resonated with me. So he started talking about an example of what he was talking about there. And that was the recruitment to replace Chris Paul. Chris Paul's a linebacker, 88 tackles, 11 tackles for loss, an interception, 3.5 sacks. He had 9 quarterback hurries, 4 breakups, forced a fumble. He had an unbelievable year, and he has a chance to have his name called on the first or second day in the NFL draft. Chris Paul is exactly what he wanted to be and exactly what Ole Miss's defense needed. So whenever he was decided to go to the NFL, which honestly he should have, Ole Miss had to replace him. And when you replace somebody like Chris Paul, you're not going to have somebody of that talent level in the 2025 portal because they just weren't there this year. There wasn't a Walter Nolan. There wasn't a Princely and Monmielen. There wasn't even a Juice Wells. There wasn't a Chris Paul. There wasn't a Trey Amos necessarily. So Ole Miss had to replace these players, and you had to figure out a way to make it work. And the way that Ole Miss decided to do this was through the aggregate. And they went out in the transfer portal and got multiple linebackers to hopefully piece together and do all the stuff that Chris Paul could do as a player by himself. None of these players are first-round draft pick level players. Some of them might play in the NFL, and a player like Andrew Jones absolutely has the talent to play at the next level, and especially the athletic ability. But not one of them is Chris Paul. So in the aggregate, you wanted to figure out a way that you could replace what Chris Paul did up next to TJ Daugherty. If you could find a linebacker in certain situations to stand next to Daugherty that has the attributes and can do some of the stuff that Chris Paul could do, maybe over the course of the season, it would kind of even out. That is their thought process of what was going on and kind of how Ole Miss attacks the portal. You look at Jaden Yates. He was a linebacker out of Marshall. He's from originally Columbus, Ohio. 119 tackles. He's a tackling machine. Look at the tackle for loss. That is really similar to what Chris Paul could do. No interceptions, low sack numbers, but he's a tackling machine, which this tells me, looking at this is a guy that's been brought in for first and second down. This is a first and second down linebacker all day long. When you look at Taj Chambers, he's an FCS linebacker. The next two linebackers are going to be FCS guys. He had 88 tackles, 7 tackles for loss. He's more of an explosive player, and they hope that he can translate to the SEC level and do the things that need to be done. Another explosive player that they brought in, Andrew Jones, 122 tackles at Grambling, 20.5 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, an extremely athletic sideline to sideline player that Chris Paul could do. So what you have between these 3 players, you hope all 3 of them hit, but if only 2 of them hit, you have all of the attributes that Chris Paul could do. If all of them hit, you're probably in better shape at linebacker than you were a year ago, even though you had a first or second round pick sitting in the linebacker room. This is what we mean by Moneyball and replacing players in the aggregate, finding this person's explosivity, this person's tackle ability, this person's scheme-wise fit. All of those together, you can match up against the teams you're going against, and they have a chance to be next to TJ Daugherty, helping out what was going on. When you replace players in the aggregate, that is really cool. And Ole Miss is doing that in multiple positions. In multiple positions, basically Billy Glasscock, the GM, set up and said, hey, you've got this amount of money. You can choose to spend it on however you choose to do it. If this gets you 3 really good linebackers and that is what you want over 1 elite linebacker, we can do that. You have this amount of money. And this is part of the Walker Jones $1 spending like 3. This is part of Lane Kiffin Moneyball. You've seen the gifts of Lane Kiffin completely buying into Moneyball. Ole Miss is not going to be the Yankees, but make no mistake, this Ole Miss team is not the Pittsburgh Pirates as well. Ole Miss is a solid mid-level team in the NIL space. They are not destitute and poor, which some will make you think, but they are never going to be the Texas and Texas A&Ms, who are the Yankees and the Dodgers, essentially, of college football. Ole Miss would be like, I don't know, Houston Astros maybe. The Detroit Tigers would be a good fit. They do things efficiently because they want to, not necessarily because they have to. Ole Miss has the ability to break the bank on players when they need to do it. Ole Miss just doesn't do it because they don't have to. They trust their evaluations. They think that they can make this $1 spend like 3, and they know how to make the players coming in fit what they need to fit. Pete Golding and Charlie Weiss Jr. and Lane Kiffin are really good at knowing which evaluations are going to fit on their team. That's the reason Ole Miss's roster has gotten so much better year over year, seemingly every year. When you look, without those elite players like Walter Nolan and Princely Amon-Mielon and Trey Amos and Ole Miss needing to replace players, did you know Cam Franklin Kim Franklin had 2.5 sacks last year and 5 tackles for loss in fairly limited playing time. That was an impressive amount to where I saw that and I was like, that's more than I thought he had. And we'll talk about that in just a second. We'll talk about players, the reason that Ole Miss was able to Moneyball this year, and the players returning, giving them the advantage of being able to kind of stand pat at certain positions. Anyway, stick around for that. The Armada Team of the Week is brought to you by our friends at Nissan and the 2025 Nissan Armada. Each week, our Locked On experts are picking one team that stands apart. From top-seeded stars to unexpected upsets, these guys showcase their strength and sheer power needed to push their team forward. This year's Team of the Week's Armada Team of the Week and Clear Cut Team of the Week are the Duke Blue Devils. John Shire's team, led by National Player of the Year candidate Cooper Flagg, just ripped through the ACC, going 19-1. That's because the ACC is not very good. The Blue Devils were plus 434 points in ACC games. See what I mean? The largest point differential by a power conference team in elite play since Kentucky in 1953 and 1954. When it comes to the Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer. That's exactly what the Duke Blue Devils have done here. It is clear that our Team of the Week is out here ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can in the all-new Nissan Armada or any of Nissan's outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada, Rogue, or Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. So, Ole Miss has the ability to moneyball some positions in the front seven because they trust what they have already in certain positions in the front seven. If Ole Miss was in a destitute position on the defensive line, you would have seen them sign a bunch of defensive linemen this year. It's the most important position on the field whenever you look at a defensive unit. If you have a good defensive line, you have a good chance to be a good football team. Linebackers are very dependent on that defensive line. Linebackers making plays and whatever they're doing, they are going to need that defensive line in front of them taking up blockers. So when Ole Miss did not take defensive linemen in this transfer portal class, did take a ton of linebackers, that let me know something about this team. You see the number with Cam Akers, 5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks. Will Eccles had 2 tackles for loss and a half sack. Akello Stone, 2 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks. Jam Bram, 2.5 tackles for loss, half sacks. Xavion Harris, 4.5 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks. And you can see that when you add Suntaran Perkins, who's technically a linebacker, who had 14 tackles for loss and 10.5 sacks, Ole Miss is feeling pretty good about the defensive line position. So you could moneyball and use attributes on this linebacker position and try and find people to play next to TJ Daugherty and alongside Suntaran Perkins. And when you look at a Jaden Yates, when you look at an Andrew Jones, when you look at a Taj Chambers, you can see that whenever they're clicking, they're tackling machines. There's somebody that can go sideline to sideline, and a lot of that has to do about them being really good at functioning when the defensive line is kept off of them. I'm really excited. I went a little bit longer than a segment on this because I like the Moneyball approach for Ole Miss in the transfer portal. And when you look and see Ole Miss at number 2 on the rankings of On3 and 247, they're pretty much consistently number 2 in all of the transfer portal rankings. You can see that this system is working even for outside guys who want splash hires. They did not break the bank like LSU and Texas Tech and Auburn and those schools. When those desperate teams that need to win right now, they didn't have to do that. They just smartly, methodically went about their business. And because of that, Lane Kiffin is the portal king. Walker Jones is the portal collective. And Billy Glasscock and the Ole Miss player personnel department is a step ahead when it comes to trusting their evaluations. Listen, some coaches recruit to the rankings. We always used to joke about that. Houston Nutt was the world's worst about signing a 4-star because he's a 4-star, not signing a 3-star because he's a 3-star. Houston Nutt was terrible about that. Some coaches trust their evaluations enough to where they'll take a 3-star because they know that that player is better than 4 stars rated by other people, writers from the Palm Beach Post, ranking players. The coaches trust their evaluations, and they picked up 3 because they wanted a little bit of margin for error. But Jaden Yates, Andrew Jones, and Taj Chambers, they all have the attributes to be heavy contributors on the defensive side of the ball. The Ole Miss front 7 next year is going to be really, really good. Now, on the back end of the defense, we have questions. I have questions. Everybody has questions. Safeties have a chance to be really young. Chris Graves, Jalen Braxton, those guys, somebody has to step up and perform. But a lot of that with the defensive line that Ole Miss is going to have in 2025 is going to help that secondary out a great deal as well. So talk about the topic that we were originally going to have the second segment, and that is the baseball team right now. And I do think that everybody needs to take a second to give Mike Bianco credit for what he's done in the non-conference portion of this baseball season. Ole Miss has rebounded from 2 subpar seasons to be sitting at 14-1 right now. The only loss that they have had has been as what I would call a 75% road game against the Texas Longhorns in Arlington, Texas. That wasn't in Austin. It wasn't a true road game, but it wasn't a true neutral site game as well because Texas was 3 hours away. It's like almost playing a game in Jackson. So Texas winning that game, that probably needs to be factored in a little bit. But Mike Bianco deserves a little bit of credit for where Ole Miss has started this season. And they have a road game tonight against the South Alabama Jaguars. And if Ole Miss can pull that off and go into 15-1 into the Arkansas season with a ton of confidence, they're just ripping the cover off the ball right now, hitting, and they're pitching the heck out of it. I'm really, really impressed with where this Ole Miss baseball team is. Tonight, we're going to talk with Derek Vandegrift, and he is going to break down what is happening all over baseball. That'll be tonight's show. We like talking to Derek. We like finding out what's going on. Hunter Elliott did not have his best stuff. Ole Miss won the game. Last year, Ole Miss loses that game. Last year, if this was last year, Ole Miss would be like 9-6 as opposed to 14-1. That would be the difference between what happened a year ago and this year. And a lot of that has to do with the starting pitching, taking a step, getting Hunter Elliott back. And when he's on, he's as good as anybody. And having Riley Maddox as a 2, and you have all of these guys in the midweek that's actually pretty good pitchers. Ole Miss's pitching staff is just a little bit deeper, it seems, than it has been in recent years. And a lot of that has to do with people going down with Tommy John, like Xavier Rivas and Hunter Elliott, and pitchers that could help you going down injured. Ole Miss takes on the South Alabama Jaguars tonight. We'll see if the Rebels can pick up a win and move to 15-1 before the Arkansas season this weekend. All right, when we come back, we will turn our attention to the basketball games that are going on this week in Nashville, Tennessee. The SEC tournament. Would it help Ole Miss to have an early exit? I'm dead serious. Is NCAA tournament means so much. Ole Miss is beat up. Matthew Murrell is basically playing on duct tape. I think that's what Michael Borky calls it. Duct tape at the moment in his knees. Will the rest help Ole Miss if there's an early episode? I think a long road in the SEC tournament could be problematic for the Ole Miss Rebels. Anyway, stick around for that. Attention, Locked On Ole Miss fans. Ever wished you could directly support your favorite Ole Miss athletes and be part of their journey? Now you can with Roy, the NIL app that helps put fans in control. Before Roy, NIL deals were often handled behind closed doors, and fans like you did not have a clear way to directly support the players you love. Now with Roy, you can make a real impact and feel closer to the athletes representing Ole Miss. With Roy, you get to choose a player that you want to support, decide how much you want to contribute, and get exclusive content straight back from the athletes you choose. The best part, if a player transfers, you get your money back. So it's a risk-free way to show your support and make your voices heard. Support your favorite players directly and help shape the future of Ole Miss sports. Download the Roy app now from the App Store and start backing Ole Miss athletes the way they deserve, with transparency, trust, and real impact. This is the future of college sports. Join it now by downloading Roy and supporting your favorite athletes. All right, so Ole Miss has an interesting situation developing this week. Ole Miss is the number 8 seed in the SEC tournament. And that means if they win the game against either the winner of Arkansas and South Carolina, because Ole Miss got a bye, if Ole Miss wins that game, they get Auburn the next game. And I think, and this is totally my opinion, that the one thing that Ole Miss needs to do is avoid 1 seeds. That's the whole goal. If Ole Miss can avoid 1 seeds, they're going to match up pretty well with whoever's out there. And to do that, I think the magic number, the Goldilocks zone, is kind of a 6 or a 7 seed. And Ole Miss is kind of in a low seed, like 6.15 on the bracket matrix. And because of that, they're close to being on that 5 line. So if Ole Miss beats Arkansas and you have Auburn, the only real bad thing that can happen to Ole Miss is if Ole Miss wins the game and ends up in that 5 seed to where you move up seeing a 1 seed and being in that side of the bracket. Ole Miss matches up really well with 2 seeds and 3 seeds and 4 seeds, as you can imagine. They already have victories against Alabama and Tennessee this season. Auburn and Florida have been problematic at best for Ole Miss. And when you look at the players down there, Ole Miss has 6 players in double figures right now. That's absolutely nuts as far as this season. Sean Padula has averages 14.9 points per game, 3.6 rebounds, and 3.83 assists per game. Sean Padula is having quietly a really, really good year for the Ole Miss Rebels. And he's shooting 39.9%, which means he's going to round up. If he hits a couple of threes, he is going to be shooting 40% from behind the arc. He is shooting 81% from behind the line. Really, really good player. The next thing is like Jamin Brakefield, the X factor of this team. I always talk about Dre Davis, but Jamin Brakefield's averaging 11.3, 4.5 rebounds a game, 1.93 assists. And one of the reasons I think a short journey in the SEC tournament would help the Ole Miss Rebels is Matthew Murrell, who averages 11 points per game, 3.4 rebounds, 2 assists, just a solid, gutsy player that honestly, if Ole Miss goes on a run in the NCAA tournament, they're going to run because of him. Because Ole Miss kind of got shot into being a little bit better team. Because when he is good and when he is on, this Ole Miss team is really good. One of the bad luck things that happened this season was Matthew Murrell getting injured and him not being himself. Because if Matthew Murrell could have been the Matthew Murrell that we all know over the course of this season, all of a sudden, this Ole Miss team, there would have been a lot more games like the Kentucky game or the Tennessee game or the Alabama game if that Matthew Murrell was healthy and able to go. They would match up better with the Florida Gators and the Auburn Tigers. Matthew Murrell at full strength makes this team athletically a different type team. But unfortunately, it's not there. And a little bit of rest, I think it has to help Matthew Murrell if he got a little bit of rest. If Ole Miss won on Thursday and lost on Friday, you would have essentially a week to kind of get a little bit more healthy, not having games on Saturday and Sunday. So even if Ole Miss loses to Auburn, I do want Ole Miss to play well, but even if Ole Miss loses that game for a third time, I think Ole Miss is in good shape to kind of make a run in the tournament depending on matchups. Again, That 6 or 7 line is kind of the Goldilocks zone for the Ole Miss basketball program moving forward. We'll see how it goes, but that's not how Chris Beard works. Everybody needs to understand that as well. It's one of the reasons I was kind of surprised, pleasantly, but surprised that against Florida, he took Sean Padula and Dre Davis and those guys out of the game, Matthew Murrell out of the game, to give them a little bit more rest and a little bit less work on their legs going into a tournament. That was kind of a pleasant surprise type deal. So we'll see how it exactly goes. But I'm pretty fired up about what could happen in Nashville. I think that South Carolina, they beat the holy heck out of Arkansas in Columbia just 2 weeks ago. It was 20 or 30 points. It was a destruction. I mean, that's what it was. But South Carolina plays different at home as opposed to on the road, and definitely at a neutral site. So I think Arkansas probably is going to get a little bit of revenge in that game. Arkansas is a 9 seed, by the way. It's ahead of Mississippi State. It's kind of, it's like, what happened to Mississippi State? Where they go 8-10 in the Southeastern Conference this year. 8-10. Just barely. They're going to make it into the tournament. But it's just weird thinking every time I've seen them play, they look better than 8-10 in the SEC. But that Texas game was absolutely ridiculous. Texas just kind of took them apart, and Texas is going to the NIT, if anything. I think Rodney Terry needs to start packing right now, because I do believe the Longhorns are going to take advantage of that situation. So we'll see how it goes. Later on in the week, Jeb, if you watch my other show, SEC on the After Dark, on the After Dark channel on YouTube, Jeb's having surgery Friday. So Friday, I'm doing everything to make sure that I'm going to be there for that. He's my brother-in-law, for those that don't know. On Thursday has a chance to be a very weird day, okay? Thursday is the basketball game with the winner of Arkansas and South Carolina. So if Ole Miss wins that game, you'll have a reaction show for me at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. You'll have the SEC squad show at about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And if Ole Miss wins, you will get a crossover that will serve as Friday's show at 7 o'clock. And the reason is I want to cross over with the Auburn game to kind of sit there and marinate a little bit as much as possible. If you're able to do that, you can kind of soak up some views and do what need to happen. It's a way to take that crossover and get the most bang for your buck on that. We'll even blue label it the whole 9 yards, but that's what I'm thinking in that game. If Ole Miss loses, there will be a regular scheduled Loom podcast on Friday at 7 a.m. And you'll have Michael Katz that will show up a little bit later on in the weekend. As we're getting ready for the NCAA tournament, all of those things are there. But we have Walker Jones on the site right now. I recommend everybody take that. And barring technology, there could be another surprise interview that pops up over the next week or so. So we'll see exactly how that goes. Anyway, I think that's all the house cleaning. So thank you for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your go-to source for Ole Miss sports. We pride ourselves on offering the most comprehensive perspectives, which is why we're the number one Ole Miss podcast out there. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On College Basketball podcast with Isaac Shade and Andy Patton. March is here, so be the most informed college basketball fan throughout the madness. Find Locked On College Basketball on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Hotty toddy, everybody. Remember, analytics is just the old English word meaning bad football. We'll see you tomorrow.